Why don't we kick off?
Okay, I'm ready. Well, all of you, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Susan Bach. I'm the pastor of St. James Episcopal Church in Long Beach, New York. And that's where this project began before getting lots of support from our Interfaith Alliance in and around Long Beach. Catherine D'Amico lives in Atlantic Beach, New York, and is the director of Audubon's Theodore Roosevelt Nature Sanctuary. She's an avid birdwatcher and an advocate for native trees and plants. And Catherine's going to be handling the technical aspect of the webinar. She's going to be handling the polling and the Q&A portion of the webinar. And Coty Keller is a beloved member of my church, St. James. He's well qualified to lead us in this series on creation care. He had a career before this one that spanned 20 years in the Navy. He was a commander of several ships, and he taught national security. And he has degrees in psychology, finance, and decision science. His current projects are, besides this one, several in Florida, including monitoring, preserving water quality, protecting the mangroves, and promoting practical action and personal action on climate change. President Biden, in his inauguration speech, said these words that I haven't been able to get out of my head. He was talking about the work that lay ahead of him to unite our nation. And he said, "My whole soul is in it. My whole soul is in it." And he was quoting Abraham Lincoln, who said it first. And I've been pondering it just for almost several weeks now. And that's clear that when it comes to the care of our beloved earth, Coty's whole soul is in it. And we are so blessed by that. We and the earth are going to benefit from his passion about this. And with that, I hand it over to Coty.
All right. Are we looking at slides now?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We hope to achieve two things tonight. First, we want to come to understand why climate change is not an environmental concern only. It's also an economic issue, a matter of national security, and perhaps above all else, it's a moral issue. We hope to explain why the time has come to take action against climate change. It's the right thing to do. Our second objective tonight is to preview what lies ahead in the next 5 sessions, so you can see how we will deal with the causes of the climate crisis, its solutions, and actions we can and must take. Here's the agenda for tonight. In a minute, Catherine's going to do a poll to get everybody involved. Then we'll explore the environmental, economic, national security, and moral views on climate. It should become clear that no matter what your primary view, taking action on climate is indeed the right thing to do. At the end, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. And then after Q&A, we'll briefly cover what comes next, how to register for the next webinar, where to go to see a recording of tonight's presentation, and how to get a copy of these slides. As I said, we'll do Q&A at the end of the presentation. You can give us your questions as we go along, if you'd like, or you can wait till the end. To ask a question, you hover your cursor down at the bottom of the screen, or in some cases, I understand on some devices, it's up at the top. You'll see the Q&A icon. You just click on it and type in your question, and we'll get to it at the end. You might also see a chat or a raise your hand icon down at the bottom. But please don't pay any attention to those. We're not going to be able to monitor those features tonight. Okay, let's roll. Research and polling by the climate communications people at Yale University shows that Americans' beliefs about global warming fall into 6 categories. You can see them here. We have the alarmed, the concerned, the cautious, the disengaged, the doubtful, and the dismissive. The alarmed are convinced that global warming is happening. It's human-caused, it's an urgent threat, and they strongly support climate policies. Most, however, do not know that they or others what they can do. The concerned people think human-caused global warming is happening, that it's a serious threat, and they support climate policies. However, they tend to believe that climate impacts are still distant in time and space. Thus, climate change remains a lower priority issue. The cautious, have not yet made up their minds. Is global warming happening? Is it human-caused? Is it serious? Disengaged know little about global warming. They rarely or never hear about it in the media. The doubtful do not think global warming is happening, or they believe it's just a natural cycle. They do not think much about the issue or consider it a serious risk. The dismissive, like this fellow hugging the gas pump here, believe global warming is not happening. They don't believe it's human caused, don't think it's a threat, and most endorse conspiracy theories. For example, global warming is a hoax. These are the 6 mindsets about climate change. And the results of the Yale survey, as they have been polling since about 2008, are useful in assessing public interest in the climate crisis. Let's see how our group compares to the national trends by taking our own poll. This poll will be anonymous. Nobody will know how you answered. So please, feel free to join in. Okay, Catherine, kick it off.
All right, I'm gonna launch the poll. So you should see the poll pop up on your screen. One question with, let's see, 6 answers that you can choose from. So you want to pick your answer and highlight the small box to the left. And then I believe on the bottom is a submit button that you have to press for your vote to be counted. Like Coty said, this is anonymous, so answer truthfully. And you know, we're really interested in getting the results here. So we'll give it a few minutes for everybody to vote, and then I will end the polling and show you the results. Oh, everybody's doing really good. We're at 50, about 90% now. Couple more people. There we go. Almost there, 96% so far have voted. Okay, you last 2 people, it's your last chance to vote. All right, Coty, I'm gonna end the polling with 54 out of 56 people voting.
All right.
Okay, and here are the results. You should all be seeing the results now.
Okay, so we have 85% alarmed. We have 9% concerned, 2% cautious, no disengaged, and 2 people doubtful. Okay.
Okay.
Want to take that down, Catherine?
I did. Should be gone.
I guess I have to click on it to make it go away. Okay, good. All right. So let's compare that with the outcome of the nationwide poll. What we see here is what was done in April of 2020. there's been a significant change in the distribution of the 6 Americas over the past 5 years. The alarm segment has more than doubled in size. This is again nationwide. It went from 11% in 2015 to 26% in 2020. You can see our group here is quite more alarmed than the national poll. While the dismissive segment has decreased by nearly half. It was 12% in 2015, and it's 7% this last year. Overall, Americans are becoming more worried about global warming, more engaged with the issue, and more supportive of climate solutions. It seems like the group tonight is predominantly in that arena. If you'd like to learn more about the Climate Communications Program, there's a link in the references that I'll send you tomorrow that will take you to a wealth of videos and analysis. It's really good stuff. We could spend an hour on it, but we have to move on. Okay, let's get into the real nitty-gritty about the issues associated with climate change. Let me start with a disclaimer about where my information is coming from. I try my best to identify the sources of the statements or views I present as we are going along. At the end of each session, you'll have access to a list of references where I've got my information from. On occasion, I might offer my own opinion. If I do, I'll try to make clear that it's my opinion and it's not coming from more trusted sources. I hope this allows you to understand where the concepts and ideas in the presentations are coming from. Let's talk about the environment, the environmental aspects of climate change. Audubon has put out 2 really good reports, one in 2015 and then one in 2019. In the 2015 report called Birds and Climate Change, they explained that we've lost 9 bird species in North America since the Industrial Revolution. Okay, that's only 9 species in a span of about 200 years. Now, because of climate change, we're talking about losing more than 300 species in the span of about a half a century. That's almost half of the nearly 700 North American bird species. For example, climate change may cause the common loon, pictured here, to disappear from Minnesota. Audubon's 2019 report is even more pessimistic, based on more recent warming trends. It finds that 2/3 of North American birds are at an increased risk of extinction from global warming. Perhaps most important from a practical aspect is what the birds are telling us about what can be in store for the other forms of life, including us. Birds are known as sentinel species. That is, they've been used to detect risks to humans by providing advance warning of a danger. The classic example, of course, is the canary in the coal mine. Birds, being more sensitive, would become sick from carbon monoxide before the miners, who would then have a chance to escape or put on protective respirators. The Audubon report serves as a harbinger of what lies ahead for other species, including humans. The climate crisis is often framed in these kinds of environmental terms, and for good reason. We want to respect the environmentalists, including the bird lovers, but we also want to broaden our view by looking at global warming's impact in other areas: economics, national security, and morality. This is a really busy chart. Take a look to see what we're talking about here. This graph is from last October, provided by the National Oceanographic and Administrative Administration, better known as NOAA. It shows the cost of droughts, floods, and storms for 40 years. If you look along the bottom horizontal axis, you see we go from 1980 to 2020. Actually, it covered the first 9 months of 2020. On the left vertical axis, we're talking about the number of events that cost more than $1 billion. And on the right-hand side, we have the total cost for each of those years. So you can see that this year alone, 2020, this is only the first 9 months of this year, we had 16 events, $16 billion weather and climate disasters across the country between January and September, costing a total of $450 billion. And that figure did not account for the wildfires that raged across the West, which cost an estimated additional $10 billion in damage. So you can see the trend here. It's not hard to project this into the future. Increasing severe and numerous climate events as the Earth continues to warm. But you can see that we're not very far away from having a couple of dozen events costing $1 billion or more in the near future. The economic threat from climate change has been clearly expressed internationally and from our own government. The 2018 report on climate from the United Nations didn't hold back. It says that unless we change our energy policies and our human behavior, we're going to see severe economic crises by as early as 2030. A report commissioned by President Trump's Commodities Futures Trading Commission issued dire warnings about climate change's impact on financial markets. In September of 2020, the report concluded that climate change threatens U.S. financial markets as the cost of wildfires, storms, droughts, and floods spread through insurance and mortgage markets, through pension funds and other financial institutions. And I'm quoting, "A world racked by frequent and devastating shocks from climate change cannot sustain the fundamental conditions supporting our financial system." This report from our own government implies that we face financial havoc by not acting. Think about us as homeowners and our needs for mortgages and insurance. As climate risks go up, so do prices for home borrowing and homeowners premiums. Let's move on to national security. Speaking from firsthand experience as a professor of national security affairs at the Naval War College, I can say people in the Pentagon and in our intelligence communities have been connecting climate change to national security for years. As Secretary of Defense James Mattis stated in testimony to Congress in 2017, climate change is real and a threat to American interests abroad and the Pentagon's assets everywhere. He also stressed that this is a real-time issue, not some distant what if scenario. Climate change is impacting stability in areas around the world where our troops are operating today. Intelligence and military analysts say scarcities caused by global climate change will increase resource competition and place additional economic burdens on countries around the world. This is why global warming is considered a threat multiplier. That's the buzz term in the Pentagon. That will aggravate poverty, environmental degradation, political instability, social tensions, and evacuation of climate refugees. Such conditions will facilitate terrorist activities and other violence calling for increased military involvement. At home, coastal military installations are threatened by rising sea levels, flooding, and storm surges. The picture here was taken at the sailors' parking lot at one of the piers at Naval Station Norfolk, the largest of our Navy's ports. This hits home for me because my ship was stationed in Norfolk. I used to park there in the 1970s. According to a report from Inside Climate, the water was 1.5 feet lower when the Naval Station Norfolk was established. Today, parts of the base are at close to sea level. Bases everywhere are in danger of heat, let me back up a minute. The oceanographer of the Navy, Admiral Titley, said this is not just about naval bases. Virtually every coastal city in the United States is in risk, is in a fight for its existence, to quote him, including the Navy bases, which is what we're talking about, but it applies to all of us living near the coast. So bases everywhere are in danger, not only of rising seas, but of killer heat. Training in extreme temperatures is life-threatening, and equipment everywhere is tested by heat, increasingly severe weather, and flooding. Perhaps most scary is the likelihood that we will face internal stressors in the coming decades. Think about millions of Americans living in inundated coastal areas who seek to migrate elsewhere in the United States for their survival. Think of climate refugees right here in the US of A. Let's shift gears and think about climate as a moral issue. In 2015, Pope Francis framed the issue of climate change as a moral imperative for which all, especially wealthy nations, are responsible. The Pope told the world in his encyclical, Laudato Si, Praise be to you, that we are called upon to be good stewards of God's creation and turn away from behavior that alters the Earth's climate and puts the world's poor and most vulnerable at risk. I don't often read from slides, but this excerpt is worth our senses, worth putting our senses of sight and hearing on. The Pope says the natural environment is a collective good, the patrimony of all humanity and the responsibility of everyone. If we make something our own, it is only to administer it for the good of all. If we do not, we burden our consciences with the weight of having denied the existence of others. Many things have to change course, but it is we human beings, above all, who need to change. We lack an awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of a future to be shared with everyone. Paul Hawken, who is the author of Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to draw down global warming, said the Pope gave the scientific issue of global warming a fully human dimension, thoughtful and caring. It was a message from the heart, suffused with compassion and unflinching in its analysis of the causes of global warming and its unjust and inequitable impact on the poor. The Pope made clear that the urgency to act falls on all humanity. On social media and in formal statements, Protestants, Jews, Buddhists, and Muslims leaders all backed the Pope's call for strong action to address climate change. Here's what they said, as reported in Time magazine in 2015. From the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, shown here with the Pope, signed a declaration warning that this is a huge challenge and promised to pray for the success of the United Nations Climate Change Conference. From Judaism, inspired by Francis, 333 rabbis wrote a rabbinical letter on climate change. One of the authors, Rabbi Arthur Waskow, explained their thinking in the foreword. Can we prevent worldwide climate-spawned disasters? Can we turn our science and our moral wisdom towards shaping a world of shared, sustainable abundance, eco-social justice? From Buddhism, the Dalai Lama said that everyone should strive for a oneness of humanity because climate change affects the entire planet. And from Islam, in a statement to Time, Imam Muhammad Magid of the Islamic Society of North America said, people of all faiths can come together for this cause because the concept of stewardship on earth is a shared belief. He said, appreciating the blessings bestowed upon us by our Creator is a value that we all take great care to respect. Well, it's been 5 years since the Pope issued his encyclical, and sadly, based on the amount of heat-trapping gas in the atmosphere, the problem has gotten worse. And the time left for taking effective action has drawn closer. But the faith community has not given up. This past December 2020, the Union of Concerned Scientists brought together faith leaders for a conversation on how religion might play a role in today's world, where we are facing 4 intersecting crises: a pandemic, climate change, racial injustice, and economic inequality. Their remarks made at that event help us understand what's involved with the concept of climate justice. A common thread runs among all major religions. We are bound by the teachings of our faiths to care for the natural world and our fellow human beings, our neighbors. Reverend Canon Sally Grover Bingham, an Episcopal from the Diocese of California, also a founder of Interfaith Power and Light, said the second greatest commandment after loving God is to love our neighbor as ourselves. Polluting our neighbor's air violates that commandment. Reverend Dr. Gerald Burley, pictured here, who also served as pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, said, God gave us a perfectly balanced natural system and gave us dominion over the earth. We have the duty to take care of God's creation, not only for ourselves, but especially because of the negative effect on people of color. Survival and health are at stake. Ibrahim Abdul Mateen, who grew up in Brooklyn, said the Quran teaches us the role of humans in the natural world. We must not have a negative impact. There are deep and long-standing connections between Islamic teachings and environmentalism. Rabbi Melanie Aaron put it this way: we are tenant farmers on an earth that belongs to God. Our duty is to hold the earth in trust. We must sacrifice for future generations and to love the stranger. William Edeglass, a Buddhist, said we must not look away from the climate crisis. We must mindfully face and work to overcome the pain and suffering it causes. The consensus of this group that was gathered by the Union of Concerned Scientists is that we fall short when it comes to caring for our neighbors. Minorities and lower income people bear the brunt of climate change. They live closer to the pollution, are most vulnerable to increasing heat and extreme weather events, and don't have the resources to adapt or protect from global warming. This is unjust. It is environmental and racial injustice, and we are bound by our faith to act. Catherine Heyo is a climate scientist at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas, where she co-directs the Climate Center. She also hosts the PBS digital series Global Weirding and is writing a book on how to talk about climate change with people who don't agree. She is the lead author on the United States government's fourth climate assessment. She is also the daughter of missionaries, the wife of a pastor, and an evangelical Christian. Dr. Heyo is one of the most inspiring speakers I've ever had the opportunity of listening to. She knows her stuff. She believes that evangelicals who take the Bible seriously care about climate change, although they may not realize it. She says that climate change will strike hard against every person. Strike hard against the very people we're told to care for and to love, amplifying hunger and poverty and increasing risks of resource scarcity that can make worse political instability and even create or worsen refugee crises. Our faith leaders have told us of the need for climate justice. Historically marginalized communities, such as women, indigenous communities, and communities of color, often face the worst consequences of climate change. For example, experiencing killer heat and not having air conditioning, droughts and floods and no means of escape or shelter. In effect, the least responsible for climate change suffer its gravest consequences. The least responsible might also be further disadvantaged by responses to climate change, which can reproduce or make worse existing inequalities. For example, the Union of Concerned Scientists and NPR report that as sea levels rise, wealthier homeowners seek to reduce their risks of chronic inundation and dwindling property values by moving to higher ground, often to communities that have been traditionally poorer and blacker or browner. The historically black neighborhoods in Miami were built west of the railroad along a limestone ridge, 7 to 8 feet above sea level. White communities were built in the flood-prone and low-lying coastal areas near the beaches and the waterfront views. Now the Black cities' neighborhoods are starting to see signs that their higher elevation is attractive to developers and investors. There's a growing fear of climate gentrification. As we work to deal with the climate crisis, it's important that we must ensure that our solutions do not repeat or reinforce existing injustices. We must also curb climate change to assure justice for all populations, because unless we limit global warming, all life will suffer, especially for the disadvantaged. In 2019, Time magazine named Greta Thunberg, a 16-year-old Swedish native, as Person of the Year. Greta brought a great deal of media attention to the idea of climate justice. Every Friday, she skipped school to strike for the climate. Greta's message to the Swedish members of parliament was, "Since you don't give a damn about my future, then I won't either." Greta also spoke at the United Nations Climate Summit. Her message sums up the climate justice concept. Our human behavior is causing grave damage and threatens the lives of those, like our children, people of color, poor folks, who have done nothing to deserve it. When you combine this moral reasoning with the realization that the climate crisis threatens the economic livelihood of all of us, as well as the security of our nation, we must conclude that it's time to act. It's the right thing to do. And that's why we're here. Our program, This Fragile Earth, Our Ireland Home, is designed to help you act. Here's what we'll provide over the next 6 weeks. Next week in session 2, we'll address the problem. We'll go into detail about the causes of global warming, because only by understanding the causes can we hope to fashion good solutions. We deal with urgency because the solutions must take effect in time to prevent unbearable consequences. We also describe some of the barriers to a quest for a stable climate. Special interests, climate skeptics, and deniers. In session 3, we talk about bold action. Describe what it's going to take to achieve a stable climate. What do we need to achieve to prevent us from following the birds to extinction, from economic ruin and global catastrophe? We'll explain the 2 paths to success, one being the reduction or eliminating of the emissions of heat-trapping gases, and 2, sequestration, removing carbon already in the atmosphere and storing it in our soils. In session 3, we'll also deal with economics. How are we going to pay for it? And uncertainties. What if the rest of the world doesn't cooperate? In session 4, we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of things. What do we need to do, or what can we do in our homes, our businesses, and houses of worship? A good part of this will be about energy conservation and the transition to zero-emission energy sources. It's also about sequestration, about taking carbon out of the air with landscapes and farming. There are also important behavioral changes, what we eat, what we buy, what we waste. In session 5, we'll talk about specific actions for governments. What we do as individuals is important for sure, but to achieve the bold action needed to reverse global warming, we need global action at all levels of government. This session will explain the actions that different levels of government can and must take. We'll describe in detail what needs to happen at the federal, state, and local levels. And then we'll graduate. Session 6, we'll put it all together, integrate what we've been learning about the crisis, its causes and solutions, and share insights on how we could be empowered to act. A few administrative items about the program. You need to register for each of the webinars. To get an email tomorrow night reminding you and telling you how to sign up for the next session. And what if you miss a session? Well, we're going to record tonight, and we'll record all 6 sessions. And the information page will have a link to the catalog for all the recordings. As I said earlier, I would try to identify the sources of the concepts and ideas we present. A list of resources will also be available after each of the webinars. Also, if you want to see the slideshow again or send it to somebody else, no problem. Go to the link in the follow-up email. So you'll get an email tonight with all that information. If you can't wait till then, you can go to the link, the URL here, tinyurl.com/withgreta, and you can see all that information at any time. All right, let's take about 15 minutes and do some Q&A. As I said before, you just click down on the Q&A icon down the bottom and type in your question, and we'll try to answer them.
So we have a few questions in here, Coty. Jack was saying that there should be another category in the Six Americas, beyond alarmed or too late. So I didn't know if you wanted to, I think, you know, it's in one way it's a joke, but I didn't know if you wanted to address that maybe there should be another category.
Well, it may be, I can sense Jack's frustration. I have a little bit of that myself. If you work on something like this for, some people have been working on this 20, 30 years and you see no progress, that actually is beyond alarmed. Maybe these people don't take the survey, or enough of them don't work statistically enough to catch the people's attention at Yale. But no, definitely, I can see being beyond alarmed. It's pretty serious. It's very serious. Thanks, Jack.
Rogers wanted to know, for the projected extinction of bird species, do you know the approximate time frame?
Oh, you know, Catherine, you might be able to help out with this too. I can, the reference section that I'll send you tonight will have links to the Audubon report. We were talking about half the birds being gone by the 2080 timeframe, I believe. Catherine, is that about right?
I think it's 2100 at a certain temperature, and that link will show you, the climate link for Audubon's website will show you different scenarios at different temperature intervals, right, and the impact in the time frame.
It's generally the statistics that stick in my mind. It's about half the birds in North America within 50 years, which is striking when you consider in 200 years since the Industrial Revolution started, we've only lost 9 species.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Or that our grandkids are not gonna see any of those birds, those 300 species of birds. So it's just a couple, 1 or 2 generations.
I know your beloved goldfinch is on the list, I think.
All my favorites are on the list. Let's see. What can we do now to help the North American birds?
Okay, I hate to be smart, but come to the next 5 sessions, because that's when we're going to talk about what's really causing this, so we understand the causes, and then what needs to happen in terms of changes in behavior in general, and what we can do about that as individuals, and what we can do about it as governments. That's really I hate to be a smart ass, but that's really come back and find out. It's too big, it's too much to talk about tonight.
Kathleen wants to know if sessions 5 and 6 are on the same day. I think they're different, right?
No, did I mess that up? I'm gonna go back here. Oh, look at that. Yes, Kathleen.
Oh, Kathleen.
Yes. Thank you, Kathleen. The last session is March 11th. You're right. Oh, thank you, Kathleen.
Good catch.
Wow, somebody stayed awake during this.
Okay, what else do we have? Joan writes the totally depressed category. Yeah, that should be a category.
Was there a question following that from Joan?
No, it was I think it was just a comment.
I think that's the other extreme from Jack. That makes perfect sense. It's bad, we're at fault, and not enough action has been taken. And as you see, you'll find in the next couple of sessions, it's coming down to, we have to accomplish so much in the next decade or we're really screwed. And that can be depressing or it can be energizing. I guess it depends. I'm with you, Joan.
Barbara has a great question. For those among us who are in the dismissive or doubtful category, and I think apply for not just the 60, 70 people on here, but, you know, in all of our lives, what would make them be more concerned or convinced about climate change? That was from Barbara Horn.
Yeah, I think I think it depends on why you're dismissive or doubtful. If it's because you own energy stocks, you might not feel that it's in your economic interest to take the action that needs to be taken, and then you might just believe that it's in your interest not to get involved. If it's because of a lack of information, the solution is what we're trying to do in this program, and that is help people become aware and to educate people as to what's going on. And that can help shift you from doubtful and dismissive towards the higher end of the action spectrum. So I think that's what we believe is through awareness and education, we can move in the right direction.
Let's see. Would you repeat your statement about folks settling in coastal areas in Florida versus Florida Ridge? That's from Lindsay.
Oh, okay. This is NPR and the Union of Concerned Scientists, and these references, Lindsay, are in the information I'll send you tonight or tomorrow night. The black neighborhoods were built on the other side of the tracks, literally, but it was higher ground. It's about, what did I say, 10 feet higher? So now that land is looking much more attractive to all the wealthy people who bought their real estate down by the beach with the good views, because as the water rises, that real estate is becoming worthless increasingly, and they want to move to higher ground. So the threat of gentrification exists for the high ground above the Limestone Ridge in Miami.
All right. These are great questions, everybody. Okay, George wants to know how you relate the pandemic with this issue. It's about science and disease. Or would you relate the pandemic with this issue?
Yes, we do. And we'll deal with that in the section on government action, George, because we really have two crises happening right now. Actually, you might say three. You have the pandemic, you have the climate crisis, and you have the economic crisis that we had before the pandemic started, and that is close to half of American families are living from paycheck to paycheck or in poverty. About 40, I guess it depends where you live. In Florida, it's about 45% of people before the pandemic were in dire economic straits already. So the actions we take for pandemic and the climate crisis need to fix that problem too that underlies it all. So that's why we'll prescribe some of the things that we do for what the government needs to do. But they're all tied together, for sure.
And then we had a related question from Imad. Does climate change have anything to do with the increase or spread of viruses in general?
Oh, I am not an expert on that, and I have not done a lot of reading. I've heard people make the argument that it does, because what we've done to degrade the environment and the extra heat has effects on the growth of pathogens, but it's not my area. I just know that argument has been made that our inattention to our the natural systems has amplified the growth of diseases. But I couldn't tell you why or where. I've just heard that. Thanks, Ahmed.
Okay, Brian says, will you include thoughts about including ideas from and for kids along the way of these presentations, please?
Yes, but next week when we talk about the problem, we'll actually use it's really a cartoon or a video from Climate Kids, and it does a very good description of the greenhouse gas effect. But that'll give you an idea of one of the resources one of the government resources that talks about climate for kids, and you can see you'll be able to tap into that. It'll be in the references for that week.
Okay. Lindsay said, with the current administration, are you more optimistic for the passage of HR 763?
Right. Okay. First of all, let me tell you about my politics. I don't do it. I'm nonpartisan, but Lindsay's talking about a bill that would where the Congress would put a price on carbon, and we'll talk about this in the session 5 on what the government needs to do. It's a very important part of the solution. So am I optimistic? I mean, we've gone from a president who says global warming's a hoax to a president who says that climate change is going to be one of his top priorities. So even though I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, you can see that I probably feel better now than I did last year. So yes, Lindsay, I am more optimistic, but I think that it's more than putting a price on carbon to get out of this terrible bind that we're in. And I hope you'll stay tuned for the next 5 sessions so we can see what we need to do.
Okay. John would like to know, how do we get nations like China and India to work towards the same goals?
We'll talk about that in detail, or in more detail, in session 6 about the government. But just briefly, we start by making it by communicating and coordinating and expecting things from other nations, which is something we need to do as far as the government concerns. We need to get the State Department back involved. And yeah, it's a very difficult question. We'll talk more about it in session 5. It definitely has to happen. And it's possible that it might not happen. I mean, that's one of the uncertainties. So the decision-making that we do in terms of what actions we're going to take has to take into account the possibility that other nations don't cooperate in a global effort to reduce emissions and sequester carbon and do all the other things that we need to do. So we'll deal with those more in detail a little bit in session 3 when we talk about uncertainties, and session 5 when we talk about government. But definitely a point that needs to be considered. What if the other guys don't play? Thanks, John.
So now, Coty, we have 2 questions, one from Laura and one from Aaron, about environmental justice. So I'm going to read them both because I feel like your answer, you can touch on both with the issue of environmental justice. So Laura says, regarding environmental justice and climate change, in what ways are rural communities most impacted? And then Aaron said, just to circle back to social justice connections, any ideas on how climate change could potentially have disproportionately negative effects on the disabled community? That's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think rural communities I think we could, in a lot of ways, look at that as being a good example of people who are doing the least to contribute to climate change suffering the worst consequences, particularly if they rely on making a living from the earth, because droughts and floods are not good for growing crops. They make life miserable. And what we need to do when we come up with our solutions is make sure we're not amplifying that. We want to, and we'll get to that and we'll try very hard when we look at individual solutions and government solutions to make sure that just as we don't want to make it worse for young people and Black people and brown people and low-income people, we also don't want to disadvantage further, cause more injustice to the rural populations. So that's very important. And also with respect to disabilities, Catherine, you said you had some ideas on that?
I just said it was a really good question. We do a lot of this, we're starting to do a lot of this work in the ED&I realm, equity, diversity, inclusion, and, you know, just on Audubon's level, like programs like Birdability, where we're trying to make environmental areas more accessible to people with restrictions, make things ADA accessible, but yeah, I mean, there's different programs and obviously, you know, environmental justice areas that are designated areas by EPA and other government organizations are prone to flooding and prone to these types of environmental problems and issues, bad water quality. But they're also the lowest income areas that don't have the means to do anything about it. So it's a really big issue. And, you know, I can see where the disabled community would fall into that also.
Yeah. Was that question from Aaron? That
was from Aaron, yeah.
Yeah, Aaron, I need to do more thinking about the impact on the disabled community. There's nothing I can add to what Catherine said. Okay, I think we're getting pretty close to the top of the hour here.
Yep. We got one more question. You wanna?
Sure, let's do it.
In the next session, this is from Mimi, in the next sessions will suggestions be made on what we as individuals can do? Sometimes it seems so huge and we figure we cannot help and therefore do nothing. I know you have an answer for that, Coty.
Yeah, for sure. We'll spend a lot of time in session 4 on what we can do in our own realm. We'll define our own realm as our own household, our family, our extended family, our church, our synagogue, our business, the things that we make decisions about, our community, our immediate community. What can we do? It's small things, large things. We'll spend a whole hour on that. It's one of my favorite topics. Very good. Thank you, Mimi. All right. So we are close to the time to wrap up. I don't want to go past the top of the hour. Let me try to summarize the main issues from tonight. The climate crisis is more than an environmental issue, as if that itself would not be enough to take us to court, would not be enough to cause us to take action. The birds, the sentinel species, are telling us that humans, like all living things, are threatened from extinction. Global warming is also an economic concern. How many billion-dollar climate-related disasters can we withstand in a year? Financial markets and our real estate investments are likely to tank unless we take action. Mortgage lending and insurance prices are likely to become too costly for many of us to afford. As sea levels rise and the killer heat sets in, national security is threatened by the loss of our bases in the US cases in the US, and more frequent violence and instability overseas. We are likely to have climate refugees within our US borders. And last but not least, we have a moral issue as global warming will strike hardest against the people our faith tells us we're supposed to love, our neighbors. It is unjust that those least responsible for the changing climate, the young and marginalized communities such as women, indigenous communities, and communities of color, are suffering the greatest consequences. It's time to act. It's the right thing to do. Now, for just a last reminder, you'll get an email tomorrow reminding you to sign up for the next session. You will also have the opportunity to look at the slides, references, and recording from tonight's presentation. I'd like to wish you all a good evening. Thank you for attending, and I look forward to being with you a week from today to get into the details of the problem. It's only by understanding the causes that we can come up with good solutions. Good night to you all.
Night. Thank you,
Night
Coty.
all.
Thank you, Jen. Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.